The photographer's flash blinded Ethan for a split second, hiding the way his wife's hand stiffened when he touched the small of her back. They were the golden couple of the Chicago charity circuit, perfect on every magazine cover. Yet for the last 6 months, the only time Elena touched him was when a lens was pointed their way. Tonight, amidst the clinking crystal and hollow laughter, the silence between them was deafening, a prelude to a shatter that everyone was watching but no one saw coming. If you understand the specific kind of loneliness that only exists inside a crowded marriage, stay with me. There are truths here that we usually only whisper in the dark. The flashbulbs popping along the red carpet created a strobe effect, dissecting the evening into a series of jagged, frozen moments. Ethan Vance blinked against the glare, his smile automatic, a muscle memory honed over 5 years of marriage to the city's darling. Beside him, Elena was radiant. She wore a dress of crushed silver velvet that seemed to pour over her body like liquid mercury, cold and beautiful. "Chin down, Mr. Vance. Hand on her waist, please," a photographer shouted from the press pen. Ethan complied. He reached out, his palm finding the curve of Elena's hip. Through the expensive fabric, he felt her body tense. It was a micro-movement, invisible to the cameras, but to him, it felt like touching an electric fence. She shifted imperceptibly away, increasing the distance between their bodies by a fraction of an inch. Just enough to tell him he wasn't welcome, but not enough to ruin the shot. "Perfect. You two look like royalty," the photographer called out. "Thank you," Elena said, her voice a practiced melody. She turned to Ethan, her eyes sweeping over his face without actually seeing him. "Let's go inside. I need a drink." As they moved into the ballroom of the Drake Hotel, the wall of humidity and expensive perfume hit them. The Chicago winter was howling outside, battering the windows off Lake Michigan. But in here, the air was still and stifling. Ethan loosened his bow tie a millimeter, feeling the familiar constriction in his chest. It wasn't the tuxedo. It was the proximity to her. For 6 months, this had been their dynamic. In the car, she had been scrolling through her phone, shielding the screen with a tilt of her wrist. When he had asked how her day was, she had sighed, a long, weary sound that suggested his existence was an interruption to her train of thought. "I'm just tired, Ethan. Don't start." That was the refrain. "The board is watching," Elena murmured now, her lips barely moving as she waved at a donor across the room. "Please try to look less like you're at a funeral." "I thought I was smiling," Ethan said, taking a champagne flute from a passing tray. "You're grimacing. It makes you look guilty." "Guilty of what?" She didn't answer. She rarely answered direct questions anymore. Instead, she smoothed the front of her dress and scanned the room, her gaze hungry, looking for someone or something that wasn't him. The orchestra on the dais transitioned from background jazz to a swelling orchestral intro. The chatter in the room dimmed. The heavy crystal chandeliers seemed to vibrate with the first notes of a waltz. It was the tradition of the winter solstice gala, the opening dance. "We have to open the floor," Elena said, her voice devoid of warmth. It was a schedule item, a task to be ticked off. "Elena," Ethan said, his voice low. He felt a sudden, desperate need to break the script. "We don't have to do this. We can just talk. Later. At home. Really talk." She looked at him then, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. "Talk about what, Ethan? Your neediness?" I can't do this right now. Just dance with me and don't step on my feet. She stepped forward, into the center of the parquet floor. The crowd parted, forming a circle of expectant faces. Phones were raised, recording the perfect couple. Ethan stood frozen at the edge of the circle. He looked at hers. She was waiting, her hand extended, palm up. The pose was elegant, inviting, the picture of a devoted wife waiting for her husband to sweep her away. But he saw the tightness in her jaw. He remembered the way she had recoiled in the hallway 3 nights ago when he tried to kiss her goodnight. He remembered the locked phone, the cold side of the bed. If I take her hand, he thought, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. I am agreeing to be invisible for the rest of my life. The music swelled. The silence from the crowd grew awkward. A few people whispered. Elena's smile faltered. Her eyes widened slightly, signaling a warning. Get here. Now. Ethan looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. He didn't step forward. Instead, he took a slow breath, the oxygen tasting sharp and metallic. He straightened his spine, looked directly into her eyes for 1 second, long enough for her to see the dead end he had reached. And then he turned around. He didn't stomp. He didn't make a scene. He simply turned his back on her outstretched hand and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the exit. Behind him, he heard the collective gasp of 300 people, a sound that sucked the air out of the room. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, the sound of his dress shoes clicking against the floor, walking away from the light, away from the perfection, and into the dark corridor alone. The heavy door of the Lincoln town car slammed shut, sealing them inside a vacuum of leather and filtered air. The sudden silence was more aggressive than the noise of the ballroom they had just fled. Outside, the Chicago wind whipped snow against the tinted glass. But inside, the temperature was controlled, perfectly sterile. Ethan sat staring straight ahead at the partition that separated them from the driver. He could see his own reflection in the glass, pale, unblinking, a stranger wearing his tuxedo. Beside him, Elena was vibrating with rage. She didn't speak until the car pulled away from the curb, sliding into the stream of traffic on Michigan Avenue. When she did, her voice was a low hiss, sharp enough to cut. Do you have any idea what you just did? Ethan didn't turn. He watched the city lights smear past the window, streaks of gold and red bleeding into the wet asphalt. I think I made myself pretty clear. Clear? She laughed, a brittle, incredulous sound. You humiliated me, Ethan, in front of the board, in front of the donors. The entire foundation was watching. You left me standing there like an idiot. You left me standing there 6 months ago, Elena, Ethan said quietly. He finally turned to look at her. In the passing streetlights, her face was a mask of disbelief. I just finally made it physical. Oh, God. Is this about sex? Again? She threw her hands up, the silver velvet of her dress rustling. She pulled her phone out of her clutch, her thumbs flying across the screen, likely doing damage control with her assistant. You are so selfish. I have been under immense pressure with this gala, and you choose the one moment I need you to be a partner to throw a tantrum. A partner, Ethan repeated the word, tasting the lie. A partner sleeps in the same bed. A partner doesn't pull their hand away like I'm diseased every time I touch them. A partner actually looks at me when I speak. I have insomnia, Ethan. I've told you. Stop lying. The words landed between them like stones. Elena stopped typing. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For the first time all night, she looked at him with something other than annoyance. There was a flicker of fear in her eyes, quickly covered by defensiveness. "Excuse me?" "I said stop lying," Ethan said, his voice steady. He felt a strange calmness washing over him, the clarity of a man who has nothing left to lose. "It's not insomnia. You don't have trouble sleeping. You just have trouble sleeping near me. I'm done being the prop in your photo op, Elena. I'm done being the husband you tolerate for the sake of the lease and the image." "You're drunk," she decided, turning back to her phone. "We are not discussing this until you're sober." The car came to a smooth halt in front of their building. The doorman, unaware that the world had just ended, opened the door with a cheerful smile. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Wonderful night for it." They rode the elevator in silence. The numbers ticked up. Lobby 1020 PH. As the doors slid open into their foyer, the minimalist elegance of the apartment felt like a museum exhibit, cold and uninhabited. Elena kicked off her heels and marched toward the kitchen, likely to pour the wine she needed to numb the inconvenience of him. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room," she called out over her shoulder. "Don't wake me up." "You don't have to worry about that," Ethan said. He walked past the living room, down the hall to the master bedroom. It smelled of her perfume, sandalwood and rose. A scent that used to make his heart race but now just made his stomach turn. He pulled his leather weekender bag from the top shelf of the closet. He didn't pack much. 2 suits, jeans, shirts, his laptop, the essentials of a life being stripped down to the studs. When he walked back out to the living room, bag in hand, Elena was standing by the kitchen island, a glass of Pinot Noir raised halfway to her lips. She froze. Her eyes dropped to the bag, then snapped back up to his face. "What is that?" she asked. "I'm staying at the Conrad tonight," Ethan said. He set his keys on the marble counter. The metal clink echoed in the large room. Elena set her glass down. Her expression shifted from anger to a sudden, sharp calculation. "Ethan, don't be dramatic. You're not leaving. Watch me." "If you walk out that door," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous, "don't expect to just waltz back in when you realize how ridiculous you're being. People talk. You leave now, and everyone will know." "Let them talk," Ethan said. He buttoned his coat, feeling the weight of the wool against his neck. "Maybe they'll have something more interesting to say than we do." He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, waiting for it. The apology, the crack in her armor, the single word that might make him stay. "Ethan," she said. He didn't turn around. "Yeah? You're ruining everything." It wasn't "I love you." It wasn't "I'm sorry." It was an accusation about her carefully constructed reality. "Goodbye, Elena," he said. He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. When the door clicked shut behind him, the sound was final. He stood there for a moment in the quiet corridor, the bag heavy in his hand, realizing that for the first time in years, he was entirely, completely alone. And for the first time in years, he could breathe. The silence in the penthouse was different now. Before, it had been a weapon Elena used to keep Ethan at bay. Now, with him gone, it felt heavy and judgmental. She stood in the center of the living room, her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows ghosting over the lights of the Chicago skyline. She didn't cry. Crying caused swelling, and she had a brunch meeting at 11. Instead, She moved with the precision of a field commander. She picked up her primary phone, her fingers flying over the screen. The group chat with the foundation board wives was already lighting up with tentative, probing questions. "Is everything okay?" We saw Ethan leave. Elena dialed Clara, the biggest gossip in her circle, knowing the woman would answer on the first ring despite the hour. "Elena! Oh my God, tell me you're okay." Clara's voice was breathless, feigning concern while hunting for details. "I'm fine, Clara, I'm just worried," Elena said, pitching her voice to a perfect tremble. She walked to the wet bar, pouring herself a glass of water she didn't drink. "Ethan has been under so much pressure with the new firm merger. I told him he shouldn't drink on an empty stomach, but you know how men are when they're stressed. He just snapped." "So he was drunk?" Clara asked, the relief audible. A drunk husband was a manageable scandal. A leaving husband was a tragedy. "I think he just needs to sleep it off. He went to the club to cool down. I just hope people understand. He's not himself lately." "Of course, darling. We all saw how patient you were with him. You're a saint." Elena hung up, her face relaxing into a flat, emotionless mask. The seed was planted. By morning, the narrative would be set. Ethan Vance had a bad night, and his saintly wife was standing by him. Reputation secured. She went into the master bedroom, unzipping the silver velvet dress and letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin. She didn't look at the empty side of the bed. She didn't look at the gap in the closet where Ethan's suits used to hang. She dressed quickly in black jeans and a thick cashmere sweater, clothes that allowed her to disappear. She grabbed her keys, but not her main purse. From the back of her lingerie drawer, underneath a stack of silk slips she hadn't worn for Ethan in years, she pulled out a small, cracked iPhone 8. She turned it on. One message waiting. "Jay, did you survive the vampires?" Elena didn't reply. She just grabbed her coat and left the apartment. She didn't take the car service. She took her own car, an older Audi she kept for errands, and drove away from the Gold Coast. She headed west, past the gleaming high-rises, into the West Loop, where the buildings turned from glass to brick, and the streets were darker, grittier. She parked in an alleyway behind a converted warehouse. The wind cut through her coat as she hurried to the steel door, punching in a code she knew better than her own anniversary. The freight elevator groaned as it ascended, smelling of oil and old wood. When it opened directly into the loft, the air changed. It was warm here, thick with the scent of turpentine, linseed oil, and stale cigarette smoke. Julian was standing by a massive canvas on the far wall, a palette knife in his hand. He was everything Ethan was not. Disheveled, chaotic, his hands stained with paint, his eyes wild and dark. He wore a t-shirt covered in charcoal smudges. He turned as the elevator gate rattled shut. He didn't smile. He just looked at her. "You're early," Julian said. His voice was rough, a stark contrast to the polished baritones of the men she had spent the evening with. "He left," Elena said. She dropped her keys on a table cluttered with paint tubes and empty wine bottles. Julian paused, the knife hovering over the canvas. "Left the party?" "Left me. Left the apartment." He packed a bag. She expected Julian to look worried, or perhaps guilty. Instead, a slow, lazy smirk spread across his face. He set the knife down and wiped his hands on a rag. "Finally grew a spine, did he? It's not funny, Julian. It's a mess. The board, the press—" "Come here," he interrupted. Elena crossed the room. The moment she was within reach, the tension that held her spine straight seemed to snap. Julian didn't ask permission. He pulled her into him, his paint-stained hands gripping the expensive cashmere of her sweater. With Ethan, her body was a fortress, stiff, unyielding, constantly recoiling. But as Julian's mouth found her neck, Elena melted. She pressed herself against him, her fingers tangling in his messy hair, a desperate, hungry sound escaping her throat. This was the drug she couldn't quit. This was the chaos she craved to balance the suffocating order of her life. "Let him go," Julian murmured against her skin, his hands moving possessively down her back. "Let him be the bad guy. You belong here anyway." "I can't just let him go," she whispered, though she was already clinging to him as if he were a life raft. "I have to fix the image first." "Shh," Julian said, kissing her to shut her up. "Forget the image. Just be here." Elena closed her eyes, blocking out the image of Ethan walking away in the ballroom. Here, in the smell of paint and sweat, she didn't have to be the perfect wife. She could be the selfish, broken thing she really was. And for a few hours, that felt like freedom. The hotel room was too quiet. It was a luxury suite on the 15th floor, decorated in beige and cream, offensive in its neutrality. Ethan had been sitting on the edge of the king-sized bed for an hour, staring at his phone. The screen remained dark. No missed calls. No texts. Not even an angry demand to know when he was coming back to collect his things. The silence was a physical weight. For years, he had conditioned himself to believe that Elena's silence was a punishment he had to wait out. A storm he had to weather until she decided to be sunny again. But this silence felt different. It felt like indifference. It felt like she had simply erased him the moment the door clicked shut. Unable to stand the sound of the ventilation system any longer, Ethan went downstairs. The hotel bar was a cavern of dark wood and low amber lighting, populated by the kind of people who were awake at 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. Insomniacs, business travelers crossing time zones, and people running away from something. Ethan took a stool at the far end of the mahogany counter. "Macallan 18. Neat," he told the bartender. He took a sip, letting the burn ground him. He placed his phone on the bar, face up. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't stop checking. "If you stare at it hard enough, maybe it'll ring, but usually it just drains the battery." The voice came from 2 stools down. Ethan turned. A woman was watching him over the rim of a martini glass. She had sharp features, dark hair cut in a severe bob, and eyes that looked tired but incredibly alert. She wasn't dressed for a gala. She wore a leather jacket over a gray hoodie, looking out of place in the high-end setting. "Do I know you?" Ethan asked, turning back to his drink. He wasn't in the mood. "No, but I know you," she said. She slid her drink over, closing the gap between them. "Ethan Vance, the architect, the husband of the year. Until about 3 hours ago." Ethan stiffened. "I'm not giving interviews. I'm not asking for one. I'm off the clock. I got fired from the Tribune 3 months ago, so my byline isn't worth much anyway." She extended a hand. "Sophie, I was at the gala, sneaking shrimp near the kitchen entrance." Ethan looked at her hand, then at her face. There was no mockery there, just a clinical curiosity. He didn't shake her hand, but he didn't tell her to leave. "Did you enjoy the show?" "Actually, I did," Sophie said, withdrawing her hand and taking a sip of her drink. It was the most honest thing I've seen in this city in years. Ethan laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Honest? I left my wife on a dance floor. I think the word you're looking for is cruel. Was it? Sophie turned on her stool to face him fully. I was watching her, before you walked away. She wasn't looking at you. She was looking at the crowd. She was checking her angles. You were drowning right next to her, and she was worried about her lighting. Ethan gripped his glass tighter. Hearing a stranger articulate the very thing that had been killing him slowly was jarring. It was like having a doctor finally diagnose a phantom pain. You're very observant, he said. It's the job, or it was. Sophie traced the rim of her glass. The thing is, most people at that party thought you were having a breakdown. The whispers were already starting before you hit the exit doors. He's drunk. He's crazy. Poor Elena. I'm sure she's confirming that theory right now, Ethan said bitterly. Probably. It's the easier story to sell, Sophie agreed. She paused, her dark eyes locking onto his. But I didn't see a breakdown. I saw a man who finally realized he was the only one in the relationship. Ethan looked down at his phone. It was still dark. The truth of her words settled in his chest, heavy and undeniable. He had spent the last 6 months thinking he was fighting for his marriage, but he had really just been fighting to be noticed by a woman who was looking right through him. She didn't even call, Ethan admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He hadn't told anyone. He shouldn't be telling this stranger. Why would she? Sophie asked softly. If she calls, she has to admit you're real. She has to admit you have needs. As long as you're just the crazy husband in the hotel, she gets to be the victim. Ethan felt a sudden surge of gratitude toward this cynical, leather-jacketed woman. She wasn't offering him false hope. She wasn't telling him to go home and apologize. She was handing him his dignity back, piece by piece. He picked up his phone. He looked at the screen one last time. The wallpaper was still a photo of him and Elena in Napa, smiling, happy, a lie frozen in pixels. You're right, Ethan said. He thumbed the power button, holding it down until the screen went black. He set the dead phone face down on the polished wood of the bar. I'm Sophie, she said again, signaling the bartender for another round. Ethan, he replied, and this time he extended his hand. Nice to meet you. As he shook her hand, the crushing weight of the Chicago skyline felt a little lighter. He was still in the void, hanging between his old life and whatever came next. But for the first time that night, he wasn't falling. The midday sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse with an aggressive brightness, exposing dust motes dancing in the air that the dim evening lighting usually hid. Ethan stood in the foyer, his key still in the lock. The apartment was silent, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the presence of the life he was dismantling. He had come for his passport and the portfolio of sketches for the Millennium Park project, files he couldn't replicate from a hotel room. He knew Elena had a donor brunch at 11 at the Art Institute. He had a 45-minute window to get in and get out without a confrontation. He moved quickly, avoiding looking at the wedding photos on the hallway console. He went straight to the study, collected his files, and shoved them into his leather satchel. He should have left then. He had everything he needed. But he didn't leave. Instead, a strange gravitational pull drew him toward the master bedroom. He told himself he needed his other watch, the one he left on the nightstand. It was a lie. He needed to see the room. He needed to see if she had slept on his side of the bed. if she had missed him. The bedroom was pristine. The bed was made with military precision, the pillows fluffed, the duvet smooth. There was no sign that anyone lived here, let alone two people whose marriage was hemorrhaging. Ethan walked to his side of the bed. The watch was there. He picked it up, the metal cold against his skin. As he turned to leave, a low, buzzing sound vibrated through the quiet room. Bzzzt, bzzzt. He froze. His own phone was in his pocket on silent. He scanned the room. The sound came again, muffled, coming from the direction of Elena's vanity, an antique French piece she treated like an altar. Ethan walked over to it. The surface was covered in expensive creams and serums, silver brushes, and a jewelry tray. He didn't see a phone. Psst. It was coming from inside. He hesitated. His hand hovered over the handle of the top drawer. This was her private space. Even in their worst moments, they had maintained boundaries. Opening this drawer felt like a violation, a breach of an unwritten treaty. But she left you on a dance floor, a voice in his head reminded him. She erased you. He pulled the drawer open. It was filled with silk lingerie, neatly folded. Tucked deep in the back, beneath a layer of black lace, a small rectangle of light glowed. Ethan reached in and pulled it out. It was an iPhone 8, old and cracked, a device he hadn't seen in years. He thought she had traded this in 3 upgrades ago. The screen was lit up with a notification. New message from Julian. The paint smell is still on my sheets. I miss you already. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ethan read the words once, twice, 3 times. The name Julian unearthed a vague memory from a dinner party years ago. An old friend from art school, Elena had said. A nobody. A chaotic artist she claimed to have outgrown. His thumb hovered over the screen. It was locked. Ethan tried their anniversary. 0612. Incorrect passcode. He tried her birthday. Incorrect passcode. He stared at the device, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He thought about the man in the message. Julian. Art school. The year she graduated. The year she always said was the most alive she ever felt. He typed in 2014. The phone unlocked. Ethan felt a wave of nausea so strong he had to grip the edge of the vanity to stay upright. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the specificity of it. The code wasn't a random number. It was a shrine to a time before him. He opened the message thread. It didn't start today. It didn't start last week. His thumb scrolled up, and the history of his marriage unraveled in reverse. October 15th. He's working late again. Thank God. Can I come over? September 3rd. I can't stand him touching me. I feel like I'm suffocating. August 20th. I looked at him across the table tonight and felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. I only want you. Ethan sat down heavily on the tufted stool. He read it all. He read the plans for their meetups. He read the mockery of his career, his stability, his boring kindness. He saw the photos, Elena in this very room, wearing the lingerie from this drawer, sending selfies to a man who lived in a warehouse. He saw the timestamp on the latest message, sent last night at 2:30 a.m., while Ethan was sitting in a hotel bar talking to a stranger. Elena, he's gone. Finally, I played the victim. It worked. Ethan lowered the phone. He looked at his reflection in the vanity mirror. He looked the same. Same eyes, same hair, same suit. But the man staring back at him was dead. The Ethan who had hoped, who had worried he wasn't enough, who had thought if he just tried harder, she would love him again. That man died in this chair. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the phone against the wall. He calmly took his own phone out of his pocket and snapped a photo of the open message thread. Then he took a photo of the insomnia texts contrasted with the timestamps of her being at Julian's. He placed the cracked iPhone back in the drawer, exactly how he found it, beneath the black lace. He closed the drawer. He stood up, picked up his satchel, and walked out of the bedroom. He moved through the apartment with a new, terrifying purpose. He wasn't confused anymore. He wasn't sad. He was a man who had been handed the weapon he needed to cut himself free. The knock on the hotel room door was hesitant, a soft, rhythmic tap that sounded nothing like the aggressive pounding Ethan might have expected. It was 7 in the evening. The city outside was a grid of amber and white lights, but inside room 1504, Ethan sat in the dark, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating a half-empty glass of scotch. He knew who it was. He didn't need to check the peephole. When he opened the door, Elena was standing there. She wasn't wearing the armor of her high-fashion wardrobe. She wore a simple trench coat belted tightly at the waist and flat shoes. Her hair was loose, lacking its usual severe spray, framing a face that was scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked younger. She looked defenseless. It was a costume, Ethan realized with a dull ache in his chest. It was the checkmate outfit. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice cracking perfectly on the last word. Ethan stepped aside. He didn't offer to take her coat. He didn't offer her a drink. He just walked back to the window and leaned against the sill, crossing his arms to keep his hands from shaking. Elena walked into the room, bringing with her the scent of the rain outside and that familiar sandalwood perfume. She looked around the generic suite with an expression of pained confusion, as if wondering how their sprawling life had shrunk to this beige box. "I didn't think you'd actually stay here," she said softly. "I thought you'd come home once you cooled off." "I am cool," Ethan said. "I've never been cooler." "Ethan, please." She took a step toward him. "I've been thinking all day, about last night, about us." "Have you?" "Yes." She stopped a few feet away from him. Her eyes welled up with tears that didn't fall, a skill she had perfected. "I was horrible. I know I was. I was stressed about the gala and the foundation. I took it out on you. I pushed you away because I was drowning. And instead of asking for your hand, I slapped it away." It was a beautiful speech. If he hadn't read the texts 3 hours ago, he would have believed it. He would have crossed the room, held her, and apologized for making a scene. He would have been the good husband one last time. But the image of the cracked iPhone screen was burned into his retinas. I played the victim. It worked. "You pushed me away for 6 months, Elena. Not one night," Ethan said, his voice flat. "I know, and I'm sorry." She closed the distance between them. Her hand reached out, tentatively touching his forearm. Her fingers were warm. "I miss you, Ethan. I miss us. Being in that apartment alone today, it terrified me. I realized I don't want to lose you." She moved in closer. Her hand slid up his arm to his shoulder, then to the back of his neck. It was a calculated invasion of his personal space, triggering the muscle memory of 5 years of marriage. Her body pressed against his, soft, yielding, offering. everything she had withheld for months. "Come home," she whispered, tilting her head back, her lips parting slightly. "Let's just go home. I'll make it up to you. Tonight." She kissed him. It wasn't a peck. It was deep, desperate, and hungry. It was the kind of kiss he had begged for, prayed for, during those long, cold nights in the guest room. This was hysterical bonding, the panic response of a predator realizing the prey is out of the trap. She was using her body to overwrite his brain. For a split second, Ethan's eyes closed. The familiarity was intoxicating. His hands twitched, instinctively wanting to pull her closer. It would be so easy to surrender, to pretend the texts didn't exist, to pretend Julian didn't exist, and just sink back into the warmth of the lie. Then he remembered the timestamp, 2:30 a.m. While he was sitting in a bar feeling gutted, she had been texting her lover about how easily she had manipulated him. The revulsion hit him like a wave of ice water. Ethan grabbed her wrists and pulled her hands off his neck. He stepped back, putting 3 feet of dead air between them. Elena stumbled slightly, her eyes flying open in genuine shock. She wasn't used to being rejected. "Ethan?" "Stop," he said. He felt sick. "Just stop." "What is wrong with you?" Her voice hardened, the soft vulnerability vanishing instantly, replaced by the sharp edge he recognized. "I am trying to fix this. I am throwing myself at you. Do you want me to beg?" "I want you to stop acting," Ethan said. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the stranger beneath the skin. "You don't miss me, Elena. You miss the safety. You miss the image. You're panic buying a husband because you realized you might actually have to pay the bill for your own life. That is an insanely cruel thing to say. Is it?" Ethan walked to the door and opened it. The hallway light spilled in, harsh and unforgiving. "Go home, Elena." "If I walk out that door," she hissed, pulling her trench coat tight around her like a shield, "I am not coming back. I won't be humiliated like this." "I know," Ethan said. He didn't mention the phone. He didn't mention Julian. He wasn't ready to play that card yet. He wanted her to sit in the confusion of her own failure first. "That's the point." Elena stared at him, her jaw working as she searched for a weapon, a word that would cut him down. Finding none, she spun on her heel and marched out. Ethan closed the door. He locked the deadbolt. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood, listening to her footsteps fade down the carpeted hall. He hadn't given in. He was still standing. But as he slid down to sit on the floor, he realized that winning the battle felt exactly like dying. The gallery in the West Loop was a converted meatpacking warehouse, now whitewashed and sanitized for the consumption of high art. The space was called Vertex, and tonight it was packed with the specific breed of Chicago socialites who confused writing, a check with having a personality. The air smelled of expensive perfume, stale white wine, and the underlying dampness of the concrete floors. Ethan stood at the entrance, uninvited and unnoticed. He wore a dark charcoal suit, not a tuxedo this time, sharp and severe. He watched the room like a predator scanning a herd. In the center of the room, standing beneath a massive, chaotic canvas splashed with violent reds and blacks, was the couple of the hour. Julian, playing the role of the tortured genius in a rumpled linen jacket, was holding a wineglass. Elena stood next to him. She was the curator, the muse, the organizer. She was glowing, her hand resting casually, too casually, on Julian's forearm as she laughed at something a donor said. It was the same laugh she used to give Ethan at dinner parties. The performance hadn't changed. Only the leading man had. Ethan moved into the room. The ripple effect was immediate. It started with the greeter at the door, whose eyes went what-o-sensual. Then a song, it spread to the clusters of guests near the bar. The whispers began, a soft hissing sound that cut through the ambient jazz. "Is that him? I thought they were done. Look at his face." The crowd parted for him, not out of respect, but out of the morbid curiosity of people waiting for a car crash. Elena saw him first. The smile slid off her face like wet paint. She stiffened, her fingers digging into the sleeve of her dress. She said something to Julian, who turned sharply, his jaw set, his body tensing for a fight. Ethan didn't stop until he was standing 3 feet away from them. The circle of silence around them was absolute. "Ethan," Elena said, her voice tight, pitched low to contain the blast radius. "What are you doing here? You're making a scene." "I'm not here to make a scene, Elena," Ethan said. His voice was calm, conversational, which seemed to terrify her more than shouting would have. "I'm just here to return something." Julian stepped forward, puffing his chest out. "Look, man, if you're here to start trouble, security is at the door. We don't need your drama." Ethan looked at Julian. Up close, the artist looked small. He looked like a man who enjoyed the idea of sleeping with a married woman, but had no concept of the reality of being a husband. "No drama," Ethan assured him. "I just wanted to congratulate you. The show is illuminating." He glanced at the painting behind them, a mess of dark strokes and hidden layers. "It looks just like her." "Ethan, leave," Elena hissed, her eyes darting to the board members watching from the corner. "We will talk about this with the lawyers." "We will," Ethan agreed. "But I wanted to tell you that I know about the insomnia, about the text messages, about the paint smell on the sheets." Elena's face went paper white. The blood drained from her lips. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She realized in that second that he had seen the phone. Ethan turned his gaze to Julian. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't shout. He simply offered a small, pitying smile. "She's yours, Julian," Ethan said, loud enough for the inner circle to hear. "I'm not fighting for her. I'm giving her to you." Julian blinked, confused by the lack of resistance. "What?" "You wanted her," Ethan continued, his eyes cold. "You wanted the late-night texts and the secret hookups. Well, now you get the rest of it. You get the mood swings. You get the need for constant validation. You get the bills. You get the reality, not just the escape." He looked back at Elena one last time. She looked small, stripped of her secrets, standing next to a man who suddenly looked terrified of the prize he had just won. "She hates sleeping on the left side of the bed," Ethan added, as if giving a helpful tip to a babysitter. "And she needs the room at exactly 68 degrees, or she won't touch you. Good luck." Ethan turned his back on them. For the second time in a week, he walked away from her. But this time there was no heaviness in his step. The silence behind him wasn't stunned shock. It was the vacuum of a fantasy collapsing. He could feel Elena's gaze burning into his back, but he didn't care. He walked out of the gallery into the cool Chicago night and took the deepest breath of his life. The pen scratched against the paper, a harsh, dry sound in the acoustic dead zone of the conference room. It was 4:00 p.m. on a Friday, 3 weeks after the gallery opening. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the law firm, snow was falling softly on Chicago, burying the grime of the city under a pristine white blanket. Ethan set the pen down. He pushed the document across the mahogany table. Done. Across from him, Elena sat with her hands folded in her lap. She looked different. The sharpness that usually defined her features, the high cheekbones, the severe jawline, seemed softened, blurred by exhaustion. She wasn't wearing the silver velvet or the aggressive trench coat. She wore a gray cardigan that looked slightly too big for her. She picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the signature line. "Julian isn't picking up his phone," she said. It wasn't an explanation. It was a confession. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair. He didn't feel the surge of triumph he thought he might. He just felt a dull, distant sadness for the waste of it all. "He's an artist, Elena. They need space, especially when things get real." "He said I was too much pressure," she whispered, staring at the paper. "He said he didn't sign up for a mortgage and divorce lawyers. He just wanted—" "The muse," Ethan finished for her. "He wanted the fantasy. But you can't live in a fantasy, Elena. Eventually, you have to do the laundry." Elena looked up at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed. For a moment, the mask dropped completely, and he saw the woman he had married 5 years ago, scared, insecure, looking for a steady hand to hold. "I ruined it," she said. "I had everything, and I burned it down because I was bored." "You weren't bored," Ethan corrected gently. "You were hollow, and you thought he could fill you up, but he's just a coat of paint." She squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear tracking through the powder on her cheek. She signed the paper. The scratch of the pen sounded like a lock clicking shut. "Goodbye, Ethan." "Goodbye, Elena." He stood up, buttoned his coat, and walked out of the office. He didn't look back. He knew that if he looked back, he would see her sitting alone in that big, cold room, realizing that the freedom she had chased was actually just exile. Ethan took a cab to Wicker Park. He had rented a loft on the top floor of a converted industrial building. Exposed brick, high beams, unfinished wood floors. It was nothing like the Gold Coast penthouse. It was rough around the edges. It was real. The apartment was mostly empty. A mattress on the floor, a few boxes of books, his drafting table set up by the window. The silence here wasn't heavy. It was expansive. It was a blank canvas. He tossed his keys on the kitchen counter and walked to the window. The sun was beginning to set, casting long purple shadows across the city. In the distance, he could see the skyscrapers of downtown, a jagged silhouette against the fading light. Somewhere in that cluster of glass and steel, Elena was likely returning to a cold, perfect apartment. His phone buzzed in his pocket. "Sophie. Drinks at the Conrad? Or are you too busy being a free man?" Ethan smiled. It was the first genuine smile that had reached his eyes in months. He typed back, "Rain check. Tonight I just want to breathe." He put the phone down. He walked to the drafting table, where a fresh sheet of vellum was taped down. He picked up a pencil. For months, he hadn't been able to draw anything but rigid lines and containment structures. Now his hand moved freely. He began to sketch, not a building, but a horizon. The sun dipped below the skyline, and the city lights flickered on, one by one. Ethan stood there in the darkening room, listening to the hum of the heater and the distant rumble of the L train. He was alone. He was starting over with nothing but his name and his talent. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the air of his new apartment, smelling of sawdust, coffee, and possibility. The long night of his marriage was over. The morning had finally come.